lot of players have at least one piece of gear that they cannot live without. For me, it happens to be a variable high-pass filter. If you're scratching your head about what that is, let me tell you. On a standard bass amp of any variety, including this one we have right here, there's generally an EQ with anywhere between 3 and 4 bands. There's a low, mid, and high. The low and high are typically shelving EQs like you see in a home stereo or in your car, where they have a set frequency point and they bring everything from that frequency either all the way down or all the way up. And then there's a mid control. Today I want to focus on the low end of your instrument and of the low end of the EQ. The one piece of gear that I bring to every gig is this high pass filter, which is sitting on top of my amp. This allows me to be a little bit more precise and surgical with how I manage the low end that is both on stage and being sent to the front of house. One thing that can kill a gig really fast is a huge wash of low end sweeping across the stage. It makes everyone's life really hard. What this tool does is you can put it in between your signal path on any bass, upright or electric, and any amplifier. If you have a 215, this works just as easy as a 110. What this high-pass filter does, which is different from a shelving EQ, is that if a shelf kind of moves everything up and down like this, a high-pass filter is more of an angle like this, and you just clear out all of the gunk that you don't need in your tone. This particular high-pass filter is a $75 unit built by a manufacturer named FDEC. Essentially what it has is 2 knobs, a volume control, and then your cut. That's the whole deal. There's no boost, there's nothing like that. It comes out at unity gain, and it starts as low as 35 Hertz. And what that means on here is that everything below 35 Hertz, which is roughly around the B string on a 5-string bass guitar, is getting filtered out. Now if I turn this dial to the left, counterclockwise, I start filtering out low end. And it goes all the way up to 140 Hertz, which is really high, especially for bass. This comes in super handy in really boomy rooms and on boomy stages, where you want to be heard, but turning up the volume just gives you more boom and more rumble. This allows you to actually get more of the mid-range content of your tone through without everyone being bludgeoned to death by all the low end. Similarly, it allows you to have more headroom going into your amplifier, which means you have a much cleaner tone to work with. If you're filtering out the frequencies that you don't need, you're not hitting the amp as hard, you have more headroom, and in turn, you're not hitting a front of house compressor or their preamp as hard. It makes everyone's job a little bit easier. And as a bass player, I feel like it's my responsibility to make everyone's job a little easier. So I think high pass filtering is great on both bass guitar and upright bass. I have 3 of these units. I keep them with my upright, I keep them with my 2 bass guitars, I use them on everything. The big advantage of it is that there are a lot of infrasonic frequencies in what we send both to our amplifiers and then what gets sent from a DI out to the front of house. An infrasonic frequency is a frequency that is robbing your amp of power, but it's not actually able to be reproduced anywhere in the signal chain. It's just taking up space. So something on a bass guitar that would be considered infrasonic might even be like the attack, the initial thump of like a thumb on a flat wound E string on a P bass if you're playing reggae or something like that. You can free up a ton of headroom and have a better quality of tone by getting all of that super low end sound that can't be reproduced by any commercial speaker out of the signal path to begin with. So another advantage to high pass filtering is that I find as a bass player, it really helps give my sound a really definite beginning and ending. As a member of the rhythm section, someone who's supposed to lock in with a drum kit, someone who's being supportive and providing a foundation for the mix, I want everyone in the band to know exactly where my sense of the groove is at all times. Again, getting rid of all that subby, tubby overhang out of my signal really helps with that. It helps me to control note length because the notes stop much easier because there's less actual physical force coming out of your speaker cabinet. But also, as a result of the stoppage of the notes, you get a much better and much cleaner envelope and start to every note. So if you're trying to lock in with a kick drum that has a very definite attack to it, it's a lot easier to hear that on a bandstand if there's no carryover between the notes. When I stop, it stops. One other thing we should be aware of as bass players is that low doesn't necessarily mean better. And what I mean by that is we don't actually hear the fundamental note of a lot of what we play. This low E string is vibrating at 41 hertz. Now, an upright bass, even with this big old sound cavity, isn't designed to reproduce the fundamental of that note. To get 41 hertz, you basically need a 9-foot Steinway grand piano. What we are actually hearing as bass players in the context of what we play are many of these sort of upper overtones and partials in the harmonic series. A lot of the meat and potatoes of our tone isn't here at 41 hertz. It's more like 82 hertz that makes up that sound that we associate with being bass. Toward that end, we can use a high-pass filter, again, to sweep out all of that low-end gunk. So if we start high-passing, we're at 35, and let's say we bring it up to around 80, there's not a huge quality or quantity of any kind of signal degradation or low-end loss because our gear just isn't reproducing that. You'd need like a Meyer line array PA that the Dead would use to sort of get those sort of frequencies reproduced at the chest rumbling volume. One thing that this sort of like mindful EQing does to your tone is in the context of a band, it frees up space for the kick and the low toms. So let those instruments occupy that really low space. I don't want to compete for it. I want to compete for the area where my instrument sounds its best, and that's really starting around 80. So I will generally start rolling off at around 80 hertz to get that second overtone in the series, and that's my starting place for high-pass filtering. Now, if it's a super boomy room or a hollow stage and there's all sorts of sympathetic vibrations going on, I'll go even higher. Maybe sometimes as high as 100, 120 even. Now you'll notice my tone starts to get a little bit thin as I start rolling further and further up. To counter that, you can actually then go to your amp's EQ and do the old Motown trick of doing a pretty aggressive high pass and then boosting the low end of your amp. And what that does is it's cutting the lows at a pretty aggressive angle, and then you use that shelving EQ that we previously spoke about to introduce some of what hasn't been cut out, and then you create an even steeper angle. So maybe we were cutting at, let's say, like a 180-degree angle, just for argument's sake. Now we're going to come in, we've sort of created this 45-degree angle of cut of our low end that comes in and sweeps. So everything up to a point is now gone. We have low end, we have body, we have punch, but we don't have all like the sub-infrasonic boom and mud that is generally associated with playing bass at a high volume. So I actually want to show you now what having a high-pass filter does for your speaker cabinet. This will work on any amp and any speaker. I've taken it out of the signal path right now, and if you look at the speaker, check out how much excursion and back and forth motion there is in it. This is on the low E. We're moving a pretty good amount of air at this point, and that's what I would call a pretty aggressive gig volume that I'm playing at right now. This is with the filter back in the signal path, right now starting out filtering at 35 hertz. There's quite a bit of motion still on the speaker. One thing that I can tell right off the bat though is there's a lot less air coming out of this port. Now if I go up higher again to sort of right around 80, still quite a bit of low end. I'm not hearing any usable loss at all there. And if this cabinet was on a floor and coupling, it'd still probably be too much low end for my taste. You might also see that the clip light is off. Right there, I've freed up a bunch of headroom on the amp itself. Now if I roll all the way up to 140 Hertz, there's almost no speaker movement at this point, and this is where I can do the trick where I introduce more low end via the EQ on the amp. So now I've got a really tight, woody, punchy tone without all of the infrasonic headroom robbing low end that was there to begin with. I want to thank you all for tuning in today. My name is Pat Harris. If you like this video, please give it a like down below, and please sign up for the YouTube channel, 4-String Ranch. If you need to know more about me for whatever reason, my website is www.gpatharris.com. Have a great one.